As soon as you put someone into space is actively trying to kill you. I didn't wake up the next morning. I stayed up the entire night obsessing about this. The little kid inside me who always wanted to be an astronaut started to see a potential future where space was closer than I thought it was.
Right now, there are about 10 people, astronauts, living in orbit somewhere around the Earth. They're some of the most carefully selected, physically elite human beings on the planet. These people exercise 2 to 3 hours a day, every day, just to slow down what outer space is doing to their bodies. And it's still not enough. Their bones are dissolving into their bloodstream at 10 times the rate of an 80-year-old with osteoporosis. Their muscles are wasting. Their vision is degrading. And if one of them has a medical emergency up there, there's no hospital, no surgeon, and really no way out. We've spent 60 years perfecting the rocket, and we've spent almost no time on the person inside it. Matthew Kuhn is a 31-year-old biomedical engineer in Houston who's trying to change that. Matt's company, Skybound Medtech, is building medical technologies to keep the human body functioning in space. And his bet is that those same solutions could transform how we treat aging right here on Earth. This episode's a unique one for so many reasons. And one of them is that Matt is at the very beginning of his journey. We don't often get to look in this early. I'm really excited for you to hear this. I am so excited about talking about Skybound for a bunch of reasons, but one of them, you are the first guest on our show who is at this point in the journey, at the very beginning, just kind of kicked things off and gotten started. And I think that's such a interesting place for people to get to look in. I'm wondering if I can ask you to tell me a story from a couple years ago when you first suddenly realized that this is what you wanted to work on. Take me back there.
So I'll take you back to October 13th, 2024, I believe. And my daughter had just been born, and I'm not much of a sleeper in the first place. Like, I tend to get maybe 5 hours of sleep. If I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm not going back to sleep. So slow to fall asleep and then light sleeper. And if you have kids, you know that in those first couple of months, a good night's sleep is not usually what you're entitled to. You know, for the first couple of weeks when my kid would wake up to feed, I wanted to allow my wife to get some rest. And the way our house is set up, we have a 3-story townhome that's basically just like a spiral staircase. So sound carries throughout the entire house. So whenever my kid would wake up in the middle of the night, my options were either to walk all the way downstairs to ground floor guest room and try to insulate the noise that way, or just walk into my walk-in closet in our bedroom, which has all my clothes hanging up, which was a nice sort of soundproofed room, you know, where for weeks and for hours every night, I would be standing there trying to rock my kid to sleep, and basically in a quiet, dark room, which gives you a lot of time alone with your thoughts, right? A lot of time to think. And then on October 13th, and this is the day where SpaceX caught their, not their Falcon rocket, their super heavy rocket, which used to be known as the BFR, the big effing rocket, but they changed the name. But they caught it on the same tower that it launched from. They called it the Mechazilla Tower. And over the years, you know, SpaceX has been totally demolishing the space industry by doing some really innovative work. And some of their work has been reusable rockets and rockets that land themselves. And for every prior demonstration where the rockets were landing back on Earth, it's always like this deployable landing system. But for this rocket launch on the 13th of October in 2024, they literally caught the rocket on a pair of metal chopsticks that jettisoned out from the top of the launch tower. These rockets are huge. They're like 150 feet long, and they're super heavy. And at the very top of this, if you imagine just a cigarette on its end, there are these little metal bars that are sticking out from the top, so that if you look down the bore of the rocket, it almost looks like a Phillips head screwdriver hole in the tops of a Phillips head. And they caught the rocket on these little metal pins. And I saw this happen, and was mesmerized. It was the first time. I'm already a space enthusiast, but yeah, seeing this was so freaking cool. And it was the first time where my sense of like wonder and appreciation for the cool stuff that SpaceX was doing started to seem like it was creeping into the real world, and it seemed applicable and it seemed relevant. It was the first time where I started to believe that the space economy was going to be civilian and not geopolitical. It was the first time where I could extrapolate the trend line and I could see how this is going to lead to reduced costs of launch. And this is a very simplified system. And I can see a future in my lifetime where ordinary civilians are going to be put into space. And this is no longer going to be the exclusive domain of astronauts. And that was a very, very exciting feeling. You know, if you can imagine the convergence of like the engineering awe of like, oh my God, this is so freaking cool. And this is the product of thousands and thousands of work hours of people who were very much drinking the Kool-Aid and lived this every day of their lives. Like this took so much effort, and I could never solve this or do any of this, even a fraction of it, with years of focus and learning. And it's just like the monumentous achievement combined with this actually changes my world. Feels like it really changes my world, and it opens up a new frontier, and literally a new frontier that had seemed up until that point totally inaccessible. And like a little kid inside me who always wanted to be an astronaut started to see a potential future where space was closer than I thought it was.
Matt, you've described that moment when you watch this giant booster landing on the chopsticks as this kind of tsunami moment where, as you've said, you suddenly started to realize that this was becoming mainstream, and all of a sudden all of these implications came to you. Tell me a little bit about what you were thinking about humanity and how that connected to Skybound, because it sounds like it all started in that moment.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, it was a bizarre feeling. And in hindsight, it's easy to tell a story of like how a lot of these ideas connect and that led to Skybound. You know, the realization is not like a novel idea. It's not like a new thought. It's easy to understand. But the convergence of all of it at the same time was like one of the craziest experiences of my entire life. Plus the magic of having my kid in my arms and the sleep deprivation to amplify all of those feelings. But started to think almost as a thought experiment, you know, what does this mean for the future, and what does the future look like? And if it becomes essentially free, let's say tomorrow going to space, it is $0 to you, it is free. What are the limitations that would prevent either Matt or David from thriving in space? Because I've always heard about the health challenges that astronauts run into when you're in orbit, whenever you're in a microgravity environment, you know, just to retain muscle mass, because once you put someone into orbit, they'll lose 1.5 to 2% of their muscle and bone mass every month. And just to clinically contextualize that, a postmenopausal patient with osteoporosis will lose 1.5% of their bone mass per year. And we see that monthly in astronauts, right? So it's 10 to 20 times higher rates of literally your bones dissolving into your bloodstream. And when that happens so quickly, we'll get more into this. You know, if you're loading the bloodstream with calcium, that greatly increases the risk of kidney stones. And if you were me, or if I'm the astronaut, the one place I would never want to get a kidney stone would be up in orbit going 50,000 miles per hour, where there is no way you're going to get to any modern hospital soon.
We'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but that's in the ideal perfect humans that the space program has already done its absolute best to carefully select to have the absolute lowest risk possible of having any health issue in space, and starting out from the absolute peak of athletic and human condition that they can curate in their space program,
Mm.
which is the other end of that.
You are so wise in this, right? Most astronauts, almost all astronauts, are kind of superhuman athletes. It's not enough that like they're awesome, easy to get along with people. Every astronaut you'll ever meet is so down to earth, ironically, and just very generous, easy to get along with people. So, of course, we idolize astronauts, or I idolize astronauts because they are smart, accomplished. They're also superhuman athletes, the most fit individuals. So, a 35-year-old man will go into space, and starting day one, T equals 0. As soon as you're in that environment, 1.5 to 2% of muscle and bone mass is going to be absorbed per month, even though every astronaut's exercising 2 to 3 hours a day just to slow this process. So, most fit individuals exercising with pure discipline and adherence to protocols and free from any pre existing health disparities, and still experience 10 times the clinical decline that a 75-year-old with osteoporosis experiences. It's fascinating.
I want to pull on that thread a little bit more because I find this so interesting. You've spoken about how space medicine, in some ways, is like longevity medicine. And we're not talking about like the magic pill that you take and stop aging, but we're talking about real problems that affect people and compound in life. And to hear you talk about it really compound in an accelerated way as soon as they're in space. So you're looking at this future where all of a sudden it might be possible for many, many, many humans that are not necessarily in absolute peak human condition, physical condition, going to space. And you shared some of the challenges with bone
Mm.
density loss. What are the other big challenges that you were struck with as you started to unpack this in terms of what opportunities there were health wise?
Yeah. Yeah. And we touched on just, one organ system, the musculoskeletal system. As
Yeah.
soon as you put someone into space, space is actively trying to kill you. You see an immediate decline in the functionality of almost every organ system in the body. You see vision impairment whenever you're in an enclosed environment, eating, rationed processed food. It doesn't induce or introduce a lot of diversity into your microbiome. So your microbiome gets totally out of whack. And there's some research that shows that when you're in orbit and you're getting bombarded with cosmic radiation, that can affect your microbiome, which we're learning a lot recently about the gut microbiome axis and how the microbiome can affect your mood and your eating habits, your appetite, hormone expression.
And just for our audience, when you say microbiome, you're talking to the diversity that all the bacteria and all the things that are living inside us that contribute to our health. Is that what
Yeah.
you're getting at?
Yeah. Actually,
Just for yeah.
I have a tongue-in-cheek term, the inner cosmos, which is a perfect way of describing it in this conversation. Always been fascinated with the inner cosmos and the outer cosmos. But yeah, the inner cosmos is the symbiosis of the complexity of the bacterial environment and your GI tract and how that affects your appetite and affects even how you digest food, and your caloric efficiency can even affect how gene expression occurs and hormones are released into your bloodstream. So, there's a lot of really interesting research on this. It could be its own, 2-hour conversation.
I'm so curious because when I hear something like this, this epiphany that you had feels like a huge moment, and I can imagine it feeling momentous. I can also imagine other people having that same sudden thought, watching that moment unfold in history and crawling back into bed and going back to work in the morning. What was different with you? Like, how did that connect to deciding to build Skybound? And tell me what you imagined Skybound could be in that moment. Like, what did you decide you were going to go build?
We're just talking about like a few organ systems that fall into disrepair. And we started to touch about like the physical fitness of astronauts. The oh shit moment for me was when I started to think about how traditionally astronauts are generalists, like jacks of all trades, but the space economy is rapidly specializing itself. And we're talking about data centers in space and satellite communications. And I think there's going to be this need for a specialized workforce in space that do one thing. And it's kind of like how today, if you happen to be an LLM expert 2 years ago, you serendipitously now have a salary that's worth $250 million, right? Because you are the person they need for that domain. I think we're going to head to the same moment in orbit, where we're going to need specialized satellite repair technicians. And a consequence of this is that the people that we need, their physiology will be inherently incompatible with living in space long term.
The way you're connecting this in the near term is as things begin to scale and as you have more technology, you're not going to be able to be as picky about the specific condition that folks are in, because that absolute skilled technician is not going to be so replaceable. And so
Exactly.
You are not connecting the dots by saying there's going to be 50,000 people living in their space town as the next step. You're saying the next step is the most skilled technicians are going to be whoever they happen to be. And we are going to have to find a way to keep them safe in space. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. And eventually that will lead to, for high volume manufacturing in space, that'll be just people living in space who are less specialized. In the near term, the next step in my mind is going to be, we're going to have to, from a venture standpoint or a geopolitical capability standpoint, there's going to be a moment sooner than we think where we're going to need to have people in space, or the whole house of cards is going to fall down. And those individuals who we need, through all resourcing that we could throw at them, through the perfect implementation of our countermeasures, it will not be enough to keep that person safe and healthy in space.
It's interesting you say from a venture standpoint, because this connects with the nuts and bolts of where you took this inspiration. Matt, I think many people might have had that same epiphany or a similar epiphany on a sleep-deprived night, looking at what had happened with SpaceX that day and just letting themselves imagine. I don't think many people would have woken up the next day and begun to build Skybound. I'd love if you could connect the dots for me about how that initial epiphany connected for you and why you decided that you were going to do it.
And actually, I didn't wake up the next morning. I stayed up the entire night obsessing about this. It was like this convergence of my intuition and so many ideas and questions were popping up at the same time. Like emotionally overwhelming curiosity and activation. It was just such a fun experience. I kind of maybe have like a toxic relationship with this kind of thing. So you take the insight that the environment of space is inherently incompatible with physiology. And this is for our most athletically or physiologically grounded and stable and healthy individuals. And we see that almost every organ system in the body starts to go into decline. The next step in my mind was, up until that point, the people we're putting into space, and I don't know how they would react to me saying this, astronauts have essentially been generalists, right? Like you train them to be functional and efficient in as many different scenarios as possible so that they can handle anything that's thrown at them. And that's been enough for how the space economy has used our infrastructure to date. When you look at the venture side of things, right? The venture investment in space-related technologies has grown 20-fold in the last 10 years. We're getting very specialized in the infrastructure that we're putting into orbit, and now the latest topic is like data centers that we're putting into space, CubeSats and zero gravity, high volume manufacturing of metamaterials and specialized, components and equipment. That is a very specialized, skill set, a very specialized technical domain. And I think what's going to happen is we have, $1 trillion of venture that's being thrown into the space economy to put the equipment into space. And we're totally ignoring the meatware, right? Like we have the software, we have the hardware, we haven't touched the meatware. And I think the meatware is the most sensitive part of the entire space economy. I believe this so foundationally and fundamentally, and this is why this is why I obsessed about starting Skybound is we're going to reach a point where we can't keep people in space for as long as we need to because their physiology is going to start to degrade too rapidly. And I think the types of people that we're going to need must have mission critical. We need this guy or gal in space tomorrow. They're going to be specialized individuals, engineers, technicians, scientists, blue collar workers with a much wider spectrum of pre-existing health conditions than what we're used to seeing in astronauts. And even today, our countermeasures aren't enough to keep astronauts healthy in space because they're countermeasures. I mean, the word countermeasure is adding weight to the other side of the equation, which is exactly what we don't want to do for space. We're trying to limit the payload that we're throwing into space. We need solutions. We need solutions to these problems. This is what kept me up the entire night, where I saw this profound need for technologies to keep human physiology functioning in extreme environments. And I, in that tsunami, also started to think of some really interesting solutions that I knew would work, or at least would be venture financeable to try. And we'll possibly get into those later. And I was frantically searching the web to try to find any sign of an existing venture that was doing this idea of working on not just one problem, not working on vision degradation in space. Who's working on physiology degradation and decline in space holistically from a systems approach? Couldn't find anything. And I'm looking around, there has to be someone local. This is Houston, right? This is the only place on the planet where you see the convergence of the largest medical complex on the planet, the Texas Medical Center, which is right out here, and substantial generational wealth and angel investment from the oil and gas industry and NASA, the legacy capital of the space age. All three of those institutions are in one zip code, right? So I'm like, that has to exist here at the very least. And I couldn't find anything that was a private, startup or for-profit entity looking into space health hardware. And I'm a hardware guy.
Just to highlight something that you just pointed out that I find fascinating, we're recording this in April of 2026. Earlier this year, there was Crew 11, which had a member, and you know more than I do about the details, but a member on that mission had a health issue. Without speculating about what was going on with that individual, the symptoms that have been shared with the public were that he suddenly couldn't speak and could not use language. And that resulted in the entire mission being scrapped and coming back to Earth. And I find it fascinating that for all of the really advanced technology being deployed in that mission and everything right now, really the solution is to bail out and yank this crew back to Earth. And I'm hearing that loud and clear in how you're describing this.
There's a lot to be said there too, just on the serendipity and the timeliness of when we finally made our launch announcement for Skybound. Because we launched, and then I think a week later, the ISS had their first ever medical evacuation for Mike Fink. Mike Fink was the astronaut who volunteered, by the way. They didn't have to disclose any of the information. But yeah, we really lucked out on even just the timing of the launch announcement. So it became very relevant very early in the company's evolution and splash. And I don't know if you feel this recently, there is so much venture interest lately in space. I feel like I'm on LinkedIn and every day I'm seeing some new $500 million round that Vast has raised to do. I think they do 3D printing in zero gravity. I know Axiom just raised a boatload of money. SpaceX is IPOing this week at 1.75 trillion or 1.5 trillion. And then today at 5:49 p.m., Artemis 2 is launching to the moon.
And what will you be looking for as a spectator on Earth that has this very focused interest in human health and space? What are some things that you're thinking about with Artemis as they take this manned human staff trip back to the moon?
I think for this one, I get to be just a little kid and enjoy the launch. It's a 10-day mission, I believe, and they're just orbiting around the moon and then coming back. But last week or the week before, Jared Isaacman just announced the next phase of the U.S. plan for space exploration, which includes landing on the moon every 6 months, I believe. So again, we've lucked out. There's something to be said about trusting your intuition. You know, when you get a tsunami of intuition and it screams at you, do this thing or start this thing, or I believe that I need to be doing whatever it is. You know, in my case, 18 months ago, believed to my very core that this was something that needed to be started. This idea of let's develop hardware solutions to harden human physiology and augment human physiology to function in extreme environments. And let's ride the wave of the second space age and the public and venture and sovereign interest in space exploration as a catalyst to create transformative technologies to treat patients on Earth. And that was the tsunami. This idea of historically, medtech has been a really tough sector to finance moonshots because compared to short cycle software, you know, there's a longer return timeline. The risk is higher. The complexity, both from the inner cosmos, the human physiology side, the economic complexity of figuring out the U.S. healthcare system and where your technology lands there, and then the regulatory complexity of navigating different approval pathways. You have all of that bundled up into a Gordian knot, which if you haven't read the Gordian knot fable, it's like one of my favorite stories. There's so much complexity that it's really tough to finance big, ambitious moonshots in medtech and to take those shots on goal.
Matt, I'm wondering if we could get down to brass tacks for folks who may not be as familiar with exactly the vision of what you're doing. You've laid out a really clear vision for what the gap is and what you see the gap becoming even bigger and bigger. Tell me what Skybound is structured to do. Like, what are you building with Skybound that you are setting up to deal with this whole ecosystem of challenges?
I'll tell you, it is a crazy person's approach to venture development, but it's been so much fun figuring out how to tie all of these threads together into a cohesive vision. So what we're doing at Skybound, I would call it a dual-use space medicine venture studio. A venture studio is a model that I became very enamored with a couple years ago. And it's this convergence of startup mentality and capital deployment or capital allocation, right? So a fund raises a bunch of money from their LPs, from an investor base, and then allocates that capital towards deals that are screened and evaluated by the managing partners for the fund. And it's kind of a shotgun approach, like you're trying to put a little bit of capital into a lot of deals and then hit the one that returns the entire fund.
And when we say deals, just for our whole audience, these are bets. Is that fair to say, well-informed bets that they're investments that they have done the research in and they feel will perform well, but the shotgun approach that you're talking about is kind of hedging their bets?
Hence the name, like hedge fund. For venture capital, and every fund does this differently, but it's a component of doing due diligence. So evaluating the risk profile or underwriting a deal, like a potential investment, which is usually in the form of an equity purchase or equity investment in a startup or a company for stock, but involves evaluating the team, the market potential, the risk profile, and ultimately what is the potential return on investment. And 90% of venture investments or startups fail to return any capital. 3 to 5% return the same amount, turn money back to the investors, and then it's the 1%ers that return the entire fund multiple times over. And that's the unicorn, the winner that venture capital is trying to invest in. but you just can't predict the future. On the other side of the model is just startups, where it is highly focused, dedicated capital deployment, right? So you have a company of a couple people working usually on one problem, right? One technology, one feature, one software stack. And a venture studio is the convergence of the two, where they meet. And the concept is, if there's risk that the majority of your investment as a venture capitalist is not going to liquidate into a return, and there's this risk as a startup that your technology just doesn't work, a venture studio is a shared infrastructure of core venture creation elements that the product of the studio is venture investable businesses. And what I mean by this is, you start, in our case at Skybound, with the MedTech Avengers core team. This is a team of inventive masters of none, right? Like people who have been in serial entrepreneurship in MedTech, who understand all the minutia and nuance of the business development side of things, but also can roll up their sleeves and do prototyping. But with a shared resource pool, the core team, big bucket of funds, the facility, right, the capital infrastructure, and an investor pool or a strategic stakeholder and partnership set. You work on multiple ventures simultaneously, from ideation through feasibility. And at Skybound, we're working on 5 platform technologies at the same time. And the idea is to take these technologies from their early, risky, nebulous, messy state and get them to the point of being Series A investable entities, recruiting a founder team, filing the patent family and patent estate, doing the animal studies or the de-risking development work, so that the product of Skybound is intended to be this evergreen, perpetual venture creation engine in the domain of dual use space medicine. And this is the magic of the portfolio that we're working on, because the ways in which the body fails in space looks exactly like severe accelerated aging. If you were able to solve those problems, you would have inherently, by default, almost as a consequence of that work, really amazing technologies for some of the biggest in-need patient populations terrestrially on Earth, like osteoporosis or sarcopenia. And this is the longevity angle to our investment thesis, is that we're not just a space company or an astronaut health company, and we're not just a medtech company. We're inherently, intentionally designing solutions that have multi-use applicability across those two domains in the same footprint, in the same form factor.
And just to make sure I'm hearing this right, you're kind of thinking, gee, if we can slow aging in space down from 10 times the normal rate to the normal rate in Earth, maybe we can take those learnings back to Earth and have benefit for people who are living on our planet as well. If we could shrink the accelerated rate in space, we could also have benefit here on the planet. Is that the thesis that I'm hearing about that?
For sure. Yeah. And even if it only kind of works in space, you'd have a much greater chance of it being successful on Earth. The age-related decline, or the age mimicking decline of space, is so much more severe than what you see on Earth. I hope you can appreciate like the venture elegance here. If you tried to start a company that was singularly focused on either of those use cases, right? I want to develop a way of preventing muscle atrophy in astronauts. I think that's inherently unfundable, right? It's a market of 10 individuals currently. On the other side of the coin, if you say, I want to develop a ambitious blue sky technology to prevent sarcopenia, it's too risky. It's too risky. It's too uncertain. And to get to an answer of if there's feasibility or not is too much of a capital risk when there are more competitive deals that are less risky and generate a better return. It is only through the convergence of both of those needs, the narrow sliver where they align these solutions to prevent zero gravity or microgravity induced muscle wasting, is going to be a mission critical must-have infrastructural need for the future space economy. And that provides the rationale to start now. And even if these technologies don't work in the space context, there's a much greater chance that there will be significant clinical benefit to millions of patients on Earth. And that's why we must do this right now. Here's multiple shots on goal and revenue generation opportunities. And let's multiply, that singular need 5 more times and do this in a portfolio approach. And that is the Skybound model in its amorphous, carved into butter state. It may develop over time. And the last thing I want to add for this, we're financing this with an initial fundraise targeting $25 million, and that will get us through the creation of 5 new startups, all at Houston.
Matt, it's hard not to get excited hearing about what you see as the opportunity with Skybound. And I would love to know what your vision is, if everything goes right, what the future might look like because Skybound existed.
Oh man, now you're tapping into the ambitious side. It's like the ambitious side of me and the dreamer side of me. I am so excited for the journey ahead. And it will not be easy. It will not be simple. It'll be messy at times. But this feels like a grounded opportunity to make a huge impact locally in developing Houston space medtech ecosystem. But I'll give the most ambitious vision or future that I see. If we're able to figure some of these things out and really develop solutions that extend human health in orbit, the far-reaching implications are just so exciting. I feel this when I wake up every single day, this anxiety and tension and motivation, excitement, and playing a real part in the expansion of the human race to other planets and other star systems. And the beauty of all of this is that it's not just playing a part in that future to abandon this planet. It's that at the same time, we're improving potentially the quality of life for the human race, right? As a species, terrestrially on Earth. So it's both. Even the name of Skybound is intended to, reference this duality. Skybound, depending on your definition, is you're either bound by the sky or you're bound for the sky. Yeah, that's the vision of the future that I see is improving human longevity on Earth and beyond. It's super exciting, and I'm very blessed and privileged to be working on it.
Wow, incredibly exciting, Matt. Thank you so much for walking me through what you're doing right now and painting this really exciting vision for the future.
No, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I would love to continue to nerd out. So thank you for the opportunity.